All right, thank you for joining us. I see that our participant numbers are sort of gradually increasing, so I'll give it a little bit longer before we officially begin. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar that we are presenting today is called Teaming for College Success, Supporting Foster Youth with College Matriculation, Post-Secondary Matriculation. Before we get started, I encourage you all to acquaint yourself with the Zoom webinar features. So as we present, please feel free to utilize the Q&A box to type in any questions that you might have. We will also do our best to answer them as they appear throughout the presentation, but we've also allocated a few minutes at the end of the presentation today for questions and answers. For those of you who would like closed captions, we have enabled the live transcript feature. So simply click the closed caption button to turn on that live transcript. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is hosted by John Burton Advocates for Youth, or JBAY. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with us, we are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve the quality of life for California's most vulnerable youth and young adults, including those who are homeless or who are currently or formerly in foster care. We accomplish our mission by advocating for better laws, training communities to strengthen their local practices, and conducting research to inform policy solutions. You can learn more about our work and access our abundant resources on our website at jbay.org. Next slide. I am Sarah Potter. I'm a senior project manager with JBAY, where I work on post-secondary matriculation initiatives for youth and young adults who've experienced foster care or homelessness. I am joined today by some very wonderful co-presenters who will introduce themselves next, starting with Jessica.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Petros. I work with Sarah here at JBAY. I'm our Associate Director of Education, and I'd like to introduce Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I am a youth advocate with JBAY. I will pass it to Deborah.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Kaiser. I'm an Assistant Regional Administrator in Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services, located in the Lancaster Regional Office. Welcome, everyone, and I'll pitch it to Carla.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Carla Macias. I'm the Independent Living Program Supervisor for the Department of Family and Children's Services here in Santa Clara County. I will now pass it on to Dana.
Hello, I'm Dana Koga. I am a recent addition to Carla's unit. I am the THP Plus Coordinator for Santa Clara County, and I also cover post-secondary services.
Great, thank you so much. So on the next slide, I'm going to just quickly go over our agenda for today. So today, my co-presenters and I will be sharing pertinent background information on foster youth and post-secondary education, including the challenges that many foster youth face while navigating the transition to college. We will also be discussing Senate Bill 12 and relevant requirements aimed at ensuring that foster youth receive the support that they need with college preparation and planning. We will then highlight the work of our SB 12 learning community partners and share the best practices they've refined to implement SB 12 requirements. Lastly, we will share additional administrative and statutory recommendations to further support implementation of SB 12 and ensure that all foster youth who aspire to go to college are able to successfully matriculate and earn a degree. Next slide. So today's webinar also corresponds with the release of our new publication, Teaming for College Success, which features the same best practices and recommendations that we will be sharing with you today. All of the materials that we're discussing, including the recording and the slides from today's webinar, will be available at the link that you see here on the screen. After the webinar is over today, I'll be sure to email all of the participants and attendees the same materials, including the link to the recorded webinar, as well as how to access the slides and the corresponding materials. All right, next slide, please. So to kick us off, I am going to turn it over to Jessica, who will be sharing research on foster youth post-secondary outcomes and information about SB 12.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Let me get us to our next slide. So before we dive in, we wanted to give a little bit of background about, why we're focusing on post-secondary education as it relates to foster youth. And the truth is there's a lot of benefits in today's economy to having a higher education. One, it can translate into higher earnings for our young people. The difference between someone with a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree, when added up over the course of someone's life, actually can equal up to more than $1 million more. But it's not just about increased earnings, there's other benefits as well. What we're seeing now too is that there's also decreased rates of unemployment among those that have a post-secondary education. And in today's economy, we're seeing now that over 65% of all jobs require some form of post-secondary education, whether that's career and technical education, a 2-year or 4-year degree. And then on the flip side, we're seeing there's even less and less jobs that don't require college education. So those jobs are becoming increasingly more competitive, pay less, and have less job security. So there's a lot of advantages for pursuing a post-secondary education. But it's also associated with other improved life outcomes as well, such as improved health outcomes, increased civic participation. So that's, like voting, lower rates of incarceration. We also see a greater likelihood of one's own children attending college as well. But I think for us, it's not just about the money. I think the ultimate goal is really helping young people achieve self-sufficiency and move to well-being, where we see that when those have a higher education, individuals end up in jobs that lead to increased career satisfaction as well. And lastly, education can also act as a buffer against, different forms of trauma and adversity, things like preventing homelessness, sexual exploitation, and incarceration. So it really focuses on helping to reduce risk factors and increasing stability for students as well. Despite the benefits of a higher education, unfortunately, that doesn't often translate into the realities for our young people. And so I wanted to share this slide to really reinforce when we look at these data points that it's so important that adult supporters of foster youth really engage them in conversations about college and career planning early on and often, and kind of refrain from assuming what you might assume they think about their college aspirations, because what we've seen from the data is that 86% of foster youth in California report that they want to go to college. Unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers that our young people face due to no fault of their own, and only about 55% actually enroll in college, whether that's a 2-year or 4-year degree. And then there's even oftentimes a lot of additional challenges that our young people face once at a college campus. And we're now seeing that only 11% actually complete a 2-year or 4-year degree by the age of 23. So while it's great that so many foster youth aspire to go to college, the reality is that they face many obstacles that need to be overcome prior to actually even enrolling at a college campus. There's other factors that we've seen from some recent data as well that impact post-secondary success for our foster youth. And this is some data that came out of a recent report from Chapin Hall on the Cal Youth Study that was looking at college outcomes for our youth in California that are in extended foster care. And this is just a little bit of some of the data from that report. There's even more. But one of the things that it showed is that the estimated odds of completing a college degree for foster youth were about 4 times higher for youth that first enrolled in a 4-year degree than for youth who first enrolled in a 2-year degree. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because applying to four-year colleges can be a little extra complicated, more steps involved, and youth really benefit from extra support to be able to successfully matriculate into a four-year college. What the data also showed is that youth who received the Chafee ETV grant, which can be up to $5,000, were almost 2.5 times more likely to actually complete a degree. So with that extra financial aid, it really set them up on a course for success. And then another interesting point, what they found when they looked at what factors really supported students in not only enrolling into college, but persisting and graduating, is that youth reported that those who received a lot of encouragement from their foster care personnel, whether that was social workers or caregivers, when they received that, high intensive encouragement to continue their education beyond high school, they actually had a greater likelihood of completing college. So that encouragement and the messages that they received early on really did translate into that ultimate goal of achieving a higher education. So in response to some of these outcomes, Senate Bill 12, or SB 12, was enacted and went into effect in January 2018. And if you're not familiar with that legislation, I wanted to give everybody a bit of an overview. What Senate Bill 12 does is it requires social workers and probation officers to identify a post-secondary support person to assist youth who are ages 16 or older with their college applications, whether that's career and technical education or a 2-year or a 4-year, and also assist them with their financial aid applications. This person can be anyone. While it's the social worker's duty to identify someone to assist the youth, it definitely doesn't have to be that social worker or probation officer. It could be a caregiver, a CASA, an ILP coordinator, maybe a mentor, and it can even be more than one person. So perhaps one person assists them with their college applications and one person assists them with their financial aid applications. I think it's important to also note that this person can change over time. So it's really important that it's regularly revisited to make sure that the right person is identified to assist the youth, as their support team can change over the years. But the law says that this person, once they're identified, must be documented by the social worker or probation officer within the case plan in CWS CMS. Under a section called the collateral section. And so if you're not sure how to do this, there's actually an accompanying ACL number 18-104 that includes guidance from the state on SB 12 and how to implement SB 12. And it also includes screenshots for someone about how to actually enter this information within the case management system called CWS CMS. So that person has to be identified unless the young person specifically indicates that they're not interested in pursuing a post-secondary education. But I think something to keep in mind is that for a lot of young people, they can change their minds. And so even if a young person initially says, I'm not interested in higher education, they might change their mind later on. And so we want to make sure that, and really recommend to our adult supporters, that they revisit this conversation with young people ongoing in case they change their mind. And if they do change their mind, the case plan does need to be updated to include the adult or the adults that would be responsible for assisting them with those college applications and financial aid applications. And a lot of times too, just to note, and I think we'll talk more about this as we go along too, that there might be underlying factors due to the trauma youth have experienced that might contribute to a young person saying, no, I don't want to go to college. And so I think that's why it's just so important to continually encourage and support youth and revisit this conversation with youth. Even they can start the conversation even before they turn 16, but per the law, they need to be asking the youth these questions starting at least age 16. And so another thing to keep in mind in terms of legislation with SB 12 is AB 153. And so this legislation just recently went into effect on January 1st of this year in 2022. And what it states is that the court must determine if the mandates and requirements of SB 12 have been completed. And in addition to that, by January 1st, 2023, Judicial Council has to adopt rules of court and to develop appropriate forms to ensure completion of SB 12 as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about this and best practices on how to implement SB 12 and AB 153, but it's definitely recommended that social workers enter this information into the court report as well, or probation officers into the court report as well, to make it easier for the court to be able to make a determination if SB 12 has been completed. Another thing to note about the ACL, or the all county letter that came out from the state with guidance about SB 12, is that it did recommend that the social workers or the probation officers encourage youth to use the child and family team meetings as a method to develop an appropriate plan for post-secondary education support. So I think sometimes for some youth, it might be very clear who on the team would be the most appropriate person to assist them with their college and financial aid applications, but sometimes it's not. And so the CFT can be a great opportunity to identify the most appropriate person and a plan for getting that youth support. And another recommendation is that the TILP, the Transition to Independent Living Plan, which we'll talk more about as well as we go through the training, can also be another great opportunity while thinking about the youth's overall goals and plans for independent living, to have a conversation about who is the most appropriate person to assist them with their college and financial aid applications. So now that you know a little bit more about the legislation and what's entailed with Senate Bill 12 and AB 153, I wanted to turn it over to my colleague Elizabeth to share a little bit more about her experience and why this legislation matters for youth in the foster care system. And just to share a little bit more about Elizabeth, Elizabeth, as she had mentioned, is a youth advocate here at John Byrne Advocates for Youth, but she is also 27 years old, attending Ventura College. She is studying history and wants to be a high school or college teacher, and very excited to share that she's actually going to be attending UC Santa Cruz this fall, which was actually always her dream school. So that's a huge accomplishment. So Elizabeth, just so we can have a little bit of a conversation, if you could start off by sharing a little bit about what your experience was like in high school, and what kind of support that you received to help you prepare for college.
So I went into care at the age of 15, and I stayed in care until I aged out at 18. And during those 3 years that I was in care, I actually ended up transferring schools 15 different times. So I definitely felt like I didn't really have a good connection to anyone or anything, at any of these institutions. And I would definitely say that I really had little to no support when it came to preparing for college. I actually ended up turning 18 in the middle of my senior year of high school. And part of why I decided to leave my group home 6 months early, as opposed to, staying and finishing high school, was because I was under the notion that I was super far behind in school. And, like you mentioned, I always dreamed about going to college, but according to my transcripts and according to counselors, I was just really far behind. And because I thought, I can't graduate with my class anyways, I felt like, why should I stay here? I can just turn 18, go, figure life out by myself. And I definitely had this assumption that it was going to be super easy for me to just enroll myself, in high school somewhere else. And it wasn't, and it was an entire year later, after, actually leaving the group home, that I would actually end up graduating high school. So it took me an extra year to finish high school. And towards the end of that year, I actually ended up finding out that, at the time I made the decision to leave the group home, I had only needed 1 credit to graduate. And, had I been privy to this information, I mean, that would have shifted the entire trajectory of my life.
Thank you for sharing that. And unfortunately, it sounds like you really didn't have a lot of that support that could have been really helpful in that transition into higher education. Could you share a little bit more what that transition to college was like for you?
Yeah, so I always tell people, like, my time in care was really hard, but it was definitely that transition to adulthood that proved to be much harder. I definitely didn't have a lot of the necessary tools or a good support system to really come into my own. I want to say within a few months of leaving the system and trying to figure things out on my own. I was still a senior in high school. I hadn't graduated, and I was kind of struggling to get back in by myself. I would have become pregnant at this time unbeknownst to me, and I would have been homeless. So I was super lucky that I had kind of kept in contact with somebody that I met actually in one of my group homes that was a tutor. And, they were really concerned about, my education and, just the fact that I was kind of really just getting lost in the system. And so, they just kept trying to figure out how they could help me. And, they didn't really have a lot of the answers, but um, they just kind of reached out to whoever they could that they thought could help me. And they ended up reaching out to someone that worked in the education department back in my old county, who went through my transcripts and found out that I had only needed 1 credit to graduate, which was great. But, during this whole time that I was living on my own and trying to figure things out. I would have given birth to my first child. I was working at Starbucks at the time, living in my car with my infant. And I mean, it was just horrible. And so when I was finally able to graduate high school, all the new adult supporters in my life were like, you have to go to college, like this is the best thing for you. And so, I didn't disagree with that. And so I was like, okay, like let me do this. And so I got enrolled in my local community college. And, I really failed, trying to juggle everything, trying to juggle being a new mother, trying to juggle like having just left the system, trying to juggle working full time and being a full time student. And, during that first semester of college, I just bombed. I failed every single class. And I just became so discouraged. And I felt like, I'm not good enough for school. I felt like I wasn't smart enough. And I just thought, I guess I'm just one of those people that has to work. And so, because I just did so poorly, I ended up, leaving and I didn't come back.
With SB 12, the requirements of the law is that every youth must have a post-secondary education support person to assist them with their college and financial aid applications. And I'm curious from your experience, how do you think having that post-secondary education support person would have made the transition to college easier for you?
I think that having a post-secondary support person, definitely maybe could have helped me realize that I didn't necessarily need to work full time. I just left the system. So there were definitely resources in place that would have supported me. And as I'm finding, just a lot of financial aid and scholarships and things that I could have utilized at that time uh, to support me, uh, like assisted daycare and stuff like that. And I really didn't know a lot about that stuff. And I was starting to build a support system, but I wasn't quite there yet in my relationships. And so I think just having that, would have just helped me come to the understanding that, I I could have just completely invested myself in school. And, even if I still bombed that first semester anyways, that, it wasn't the end. And I think because I really wasn't close to anyone at that time, I couldn't see past what was happening right now, and I think having somebody, there for me at that time would have made all the difference. I mean, I think that it would have looked like me, you know, finishing college, transferring, right after.
Great. Thank you for that. And if you could just share a little bit about, because we know that you are back in school, you're about to transfer to UC Santa Cruz. When did you decide to go back to college, and what resources helped?
Because of that, semester that I just described, I never really had the intention of going back. I started waitressing and just working jobs here and there. And, I guess became content with that lifestyle. And, during the pandemic, I ended up losing my job as a waitress, and I didn't really have anything else to do. So I just started taking classes here and there. And, I surprised myself with how well I was doing. So, every semester I just started adding more and more classes. And, this was like 2 years ago now. So, as you mentioned, I'm actually in my last semester at Ventura College right now, and getting ready to transfer to the school of my dreams. So, and I just 7 years ago, I just didn't even think that it was possible.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again, Go Banana Slugs. We're really excited for you. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about your experience and why, it's so critical that our youth get that support to help them in that transition to college. And make sure to check out the chat because there's some shout outs in there for you too. So, just to close us out here on this section, we know the benefits of Senate Bill 12 and why this law went into effect. And unfortunately, there have been challenges with implementation. And although this is the law and the legal requirements, one of the challenges that we just wanted to share with you that we have been seeing is the guidance from the state to enter this post-secondary support person within CWCMS. It's just not its own unique field in the data system. It's actually shared with another field. So unfortunately, our state or our counties aren't able to generate reports to really be able to track compliance. So there have been some concerns that some parties may not be adequately receiving the assistance that they need to complete their college and financial aid applications. And I think some of these concerns were heightened when we did do a random poll of case files in one of our large counties to find that in the 100 case plans, there was actually zero compliance with SB 12. So I think given some of these challenges, that led us to launch an SB 12 learning community to think about how we can identify best practices to really successfully implement this legislation. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about this learning community.
Thank you, Jessica, and also thank you, Elizabeth, for bravely sharing your story. And I echo all of the chat messages. Congratulations on your upcoming transition to UC Santa Cruz, your dream school. We're all cheering you on. All right, so now I'm going to spend some time talking about our learning community. Next slide, please. So in light of the implementation challenges that Jessica just shared, JBay launched a statewide SB 12 learning community focused on identifying best practices. The learning community began in March of 2020 and continued until December of 2021. And it included 9 child welfare and probation agencies in 7 different California counties: Los Angeles, Monterey, Placer, Plumas, San Diego, Santa Clara, and Ventura. I also want to note that Catholic Charities of Santa Clara County, which is a Bay Area nonprofit that works with unaccompanied and refugee minors who are in foster care, also participated. The learning community consisted of 4 quarterly group calls and ongoing one-on-one technical assistance sessions to advance local priorities focused on SB 12 and overall foster youth post-secondary matriculation. Next slide. So to focus the learning community's efforts, the training and technical assistance was centered on our college transitions framework, which provides 8 general recommendations for SB 12 implementation. So JBay worked with the learning community participants to identify priorities and strategies using these recommendations as a foundation. So the recommendations included ensuring that counties are documenting a post-secondary support person in the youth's case plan as required by SB 12. It also recommended training social workers and probation officers on college planning and post-secondary matriculation, including how to apply for college, navigating college and financial aid applications. And it also focused on ensuring that all of the other potential post-secondary educational support people in foster youth lives receive the same necessary training and support to be able to adequately provide foster youth with the resources and help that they need to navigate that process. It also covered oversight issues and making sure that our dependency judges and attorneys were aware of the SB 12 requirements and also actively ensuring that they're implemented correctly. Next slide. And then it also recommended a lot of cross-system collaboration, whether that was with ILP partners or also our local education agencies that have the specialized knowledge to assist foster youth with college preparation and matriculation. And then it also emphasized the importance of engaging caregivers on college and career planning, knowing full well that they are likely going to either be a designated post-secondary support person in that young person's case plan, or be assisting with various tasks and activities related to college planning and applications, et cetera, along the way. And then last but certainly not least, it also emphasized engaging youth in long-term college and career planning, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. So these were the general recommendations that were included in our college transitions framework, and our learning community participants identified which of these they really wanted to focus on and prioritize, and then how that would look at the local level for implementation. So today we're going to talk about some best practices that were developed by our learning community using this transitions framework as a foundation. And so the very first one up next is our best practice on case planning policies, and I will turn it over to Jessica.
Thanks, Sarah. So our first recommendation is, first and foremost, if you haven't yet, embed the language and the requirements around SB 12 within any existing policies or creating a new policy. And I wanted to share some of the great work that our partners in LA County have done around this as an example. And it's pretty simple. What they did is they took some of the language from the ACL that we mentioned earlier and embedded that within their existing case plan policy. And we actually have that as an example within the toolkit that Sarah mentioned earlier, so folks can see one example of what it looks like to embed this policy within your county. And the importance of this is to, both institutionalize it within your department, but also to institutionalize that as an organizational priority, there's a value around post-secondary matriculation and achievement. Secondly, while policies can be helpful tools to create change, we know sometimes that just having a policy doesn't always lead to practice. And so we also recommend that with any new policy, it's reinforced with ongoing communication and reminders to really bridge that policy into practice. And I think there's many ways that counties can do this, and thinking about ways to develop really a communication strategy within your department to inform your team about the requirements. And that might need to be something that gets reinforced more than once. But one way that LA County did this is they actually created a memo that was sent out to all of their social workers countywide from their director. And it included, the requirements of SB 12, but it also had a lot of other really helpful additional information for social workers about how they can utilize the child and family team as a great opportunity to identify that support person. Also recommendations on how they could utilize the Transitional Independent Living Plan, also known as the TILT. And it also included a lot of resources for social workers, both within the department as well as in the community, that they could tap into to leverage to help link the youth to, the appropriate resources to assist them with their applications. And so I think that was just, one great example that other counties can think about too, is how they can get that information out in addition to the language within their policy. And then another example I wanted to share that our partners at LA County Department of Children and Family Services did is, in addition to the policy within the case plan, they also included a template of an example sample case plan for their social workers, so they could see exactly what it looks like to document this within the case plan, how to do that effectively. And there's it's pretty simple and straightforward, but we really loved that the case plan had that type of prompts and examples for the social workers, and it was able to be used as a training tool for onboarding of new social workers, so that as they're learning about the case plan, they can also learn how to document SB 12 within that case plan. So that is just one of many best practices. So I'll turn it over now back to Sarah.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes. And so the next best practice that we're going to talk about today is leveraging the child and family teams. Next slide, please. So the child and family team meeting can be used to make a plan to support foster youth in reaching their college and career goals, and then get connected to the appropriate supports and resources. I think probably contrary to sort of how we've come to know CFTs, they don't always have to be focused on a crisis or an immediate need, but they can also be requested to proactively discuss the youth's academic performance as well as their progress towards their long-term goals and overall well-being. So discussing youth's interests, their goals, and the key educational planning milestones in middle school and high school can be great topics to explore at CFTs. And again, this is a great way for us to really come together and talk to the youth and the young person about what their long-term goals are and give them a space where they can really dream and imagine a bright future for themselves. Next slide. So the benefits of an education-focused CFT are vast, and here's just a few of them. The first is that it creates a culture that values the youth's overall well-being, and it really communicates to them that they do have the potential to reach their college and career goals. We have a phrase here at JBay where we say that all foster youth have college potential. They're all college material, and the CFTs are a great way for folks to kind of come together and reiterate that message. It also makes sure that there are shared educational goals amongst all stakeholders, and this can include our educational partners as well. The ACIN that Jessica mentioned earlier that focuses on leveraging the CFTs to support educational goals, encourages including educational partners, whether it's a high school counselor or maybe even a teacher that the youth has a really great relationship with, or a foster youth services coordinating program liaison. They're all those educational partners who can be included and can definitely share their expertise on college planning and matriculation. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in this section. It also helps the education system as a whole just to be better prepared and informed to meet the needs of their foster youth students. And it ensures that students succeed not just in the home, but also in their community and in their school, where they're really spending a lot of their time, right? And then last but not least, it really helps increase awareness for students. I think a lot of times foster youth indicate that they really just didn't know what resources and supports were available to them. And this includes while they're working on college planning in high school and also when they get to college. So making sure that they're aware of all of the on-campus resources and supports that are available to them. And then it helps them stay on track. So the more that we do this sort of proactive planning and leverage the CFT to think long term, the more we're able to track that the youth is actually progressing and meeting college entrance requirements, exploring career options and programs that would be appropriate for them. And it just helps, students really start to lay out that conversation early on. And again, reinforces that message that they are college material and that college is an option. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleagues from Santa Clara County, DCFS, to talk about how they envisioned and developed education CFTs.
Thank you, Sarah. So so here in Santa Clara County with the SB 12, we looked at what are all the requirements, what are our current and existing services, and how could we leverage? But most importantly, looking at how and why an education CFT can be of a benefit, not only to the youth, but also for the social worker. So as mentioned earlier, under SB 12, the social worker has to provide, our child welfare agencies have to provide assistance to foster youth 16 years of age or older and non-minor dependents who express an interest in pursuing post-secondary education, including career and technical education. That they have to identify that in their court-ordered case plan. Santa Clara County went a little bit above that, and there's actually we created court documents that the social worker needs to attach to the court report that covers not only education but employment, making sure the youth is getting their documentation that they need, like birth certificate, social security card, and all of those items. But again, too, with that, as mentioned earlier as well, that the social worker needs to make changes in the court-ordered case plan when that the identified person either changes or that they're not no longer appropriate to serve as that post-secondary education person. So again, the benefit is, it does help the social worker with fulfilling those mandates. And for the youth, it really helps the youth to envision that, it's really the social worker to help the youth to envision college or a technical education, and post-secondary education may not be the path for all foster youth. However, the social worker or someone in the foster youth circle of support should be discussing the benefits of higher education. And per the All County Information Notice 171-18, social workers are encouraged to utilize the child family team meetings as a best practice to provide an opportunity for foster youth to explore the possibilities of post-secondary education or career or technical education as a goal after high school. This is a venue to create that education plan, who's going to support the foster youth, with achieving the tasks outlined in the plan, identify the supports and services needed, and ensure the youth is aware of all the resources available to help them to be successful, and inclusion of campus support staff so they are equipped with the support necessary for college success. So these are many of the reasons why in Santa Clara County, we, just really, envision that this education CFT would be of benefit for those kids who are really, expressing like, yes, I want to go to college. I want to, explore what the possibilities are for myself. And the education CFT is a perfect opportunity for the social worker to complete the TILP, the Transitional Independent Living Plan, with the educational goals the youth has identified, bring together the youth circle of support to identify the post-secondary education support person, to document that in the youth CWS CMS case plan, explore potential interests, careers, and educational institutions. And it's a forum to track the progress of the youth's short-term and long-term education goals. Next slide. So our partners. So here in Santa Clara County, the Department of Family and Children's Services, our ILP, and the Child and Family Team Unit who facilitates our CFTs, we looked at our existing partners and contracts to see how we can leverage resources. So Santa Clara County is in the second full year of our partnership with our local Santa Clara County Office of Education. Per All County Letter 16-91, it outlines child welfare departments the opportunity to partner with county offices of education to draw down federal Title IV-E funding to increase educational case management services for foster youth. Here in Santa Clara County, an education manager from our County Office of Education is assigned to every child and youth who are in our dependency court system. And those staff monitor grades, attendance, behavior, that includes suspensions, expulsions, and special education, and coordinates educational services with districts, social workers, providers, and caregivers for the foster youth to have academic success. We also have Pivotal. It's a local education nonprofit here in Santa Clara County. They have an internship program through San Jose State University. This internship program has been used in our county as a no-cost MOU to provide referral-based educational case management services for foster youth. In addition to this no-cost MOU, Pivotal has a contract with Santa Clara County to provide a post-secondary scholarship to non-minor dependents. When looking at our partnerships, Pivotal has always been our go-to for post-secondary support. So as the county entered into the partnership with our COE, taking into account the previously mentioned ACL and ACIN, it made sense to make changes to the no-cost MOU for fiscal year 2021 and 2022 to support the education CFTs, with the focus of Pivotal staff being the identified post-secondary education support person for the foster youth. In our county, we contract our ILP program with the Bill Wilson Center. We ensure every youth has an ILP representative at our My Time meetings, which is our CFT for foster youth 16 and over, that occurs like at least once per year, and then our 90-day transition meetings as the youth transition out of foster care. So with those two CFTs, we always have to have an ILP representative in attendance. For our education CFT, if an ILP case manager is not assigned, we go ahead and move forward. However, the social worker is encouraged at that point to refer the young person to ILP, as ILP can provide additional supports with housing referrals, critical financial assistance, employment, wellness, and can be identified as the backup post-secondary education support person. Next slide. So this slide shows a brief overview of the roles and responsibilities for each of the required attendees of the education CFT. So as I mentioned earlier, every youth and child involved with a dependency court system is assigned to a COE education manager. So we have a COE education manager that is in our dependent intake units, and they do a whole CUME file review. And then when that case transfers to what we call a continuing social worker here in Santa Clara County, then the case is transferred to another education manager. And so when a foster youth is referred by their social worker to an education CFT, they are assigned to a pivotal coach. And the social worker's role in this education CFT is, one, they make the referral. They can use the goals outlined in the CFT. They can use those as goals to identify in the TILP. And then, they can document in the case plan who is going to be the identified post-secondary support person. And for the education case manager, they are to report on any attendance issues, behavior, special education, any services that the foster youth can participate on campus. And the pivotal coaches are to support, the exploration of careers, degrees, and how they could finance college. Next slide. In working with JBay on this project, we looked at existing resources within JBay. JBay has developed various checklists over the years on supporting foster youth as they transition from middle and high school to post-secondary. Santa Clara County, our educational partners in JBay use these checklists to help identify areas of focus during the education CFT for each grade level, starting at 8th grade all the way to post-secondary. This all resulted in our education-focused child and family team guidance and checklist publication. The publication serves as a guide for the joint decision-making unit facilitator to ensure the participants are discussing important details from each grade level, such as managing time, meeting with school counselors, testing at each grade level, college exploration resources, visiting college campuses, ensuring they're taking the right high school courses for a 2-year versus 4-year, referral to ILP, participating in internships, employment, and extracurricular activities. It can help the facilitator guide the conversation and keep everyone in the CFT on track as they support the foster youth as they transition to post-secondary education. In addition, it provides detailed areas for the social worker, what supports the department has to offer. Again, the referral to ILP, a referral to our Hub Youth Center here. We have an intern and earn internships for our foster youth here in Santa Clara County, what financial supports there are, address school of origin, and the important documents, as I mentioned before, social security card, a work permit, and birth certificates that the youth may need. As noted in the previous slide, the guide goes into more details for both the COE education manager and the pivotal coach. This guide has been provided to all the parties who are required to attend, so we have a successful and meaningful CFT. Now I'm going to send it over to Dana, who can speak more to the actual CFT.
Thank you, Carla. So Santa Clara County has 3 CFTs tailored to support foster youth as they transition out of care. We have the Get Real Conference, which focuses on pregnant and parenting youth, My Time meetings for all foster youth in general, 90-day transition plan meeting, which is for our youth exiting out of care. Now we have a 4th with the Education CFT. And as mentioned before, this focuses on supporting foster youth who expressed interest and or have a goal of pursuing post-secondary education or career and technical education starting about the age of 8th grade. So community partners that should be invited are education rights holders, CASA, school counselor, foster youth liaison, transitional housing case manager, and RAP team. The education CFT is youth driven. It's based on a youth's needs. Ideally, before the meeting, The social worker or pivotal coach would discuss with the youth the purpose and goals of the meeting. The youth is asked who they want to invite. Participants may include the youth's caregivers, family, friends, mentors, CASA, and other significant individuals who may support the youth in developing and achieving their educational goals. If you take a look at the slide, you'll see a tool we use for goal mapping. Before the education CFT, the social worker or pivotal coach will ask the youth to select 2 to 3 education-related life domains to discuss at the meeting. These domain areas include, as you can see, transportation, career exploration, student housing, coursework testing, financial aid scholarships and grants, campus supports and resources, general education resources, non-minor dependent eligibility for post-secondary, and additional education resources. Now, during the education CFT, the youth is asked to select one of the education domains and talk about the goal that they envision around that domain. Participants then will assist the youth in goal mapping exercise by developing steps to achieve that goal, including identifying needs and resources. Goals should be achievable within a 6 months time frame and can be incorporated into the youth's TILP. The exercise then continues with subsequent domains that the youth chooses. These domains encourage discussion and planning of educational goals to help our foster youth envision life after high school. Next slide, please. So Santa Clara County had a short-term work group to help develop the publication and outline the implementation. As Carla mentioned earlier, our county developed the education-focused CFT guidance and checklists publication. To facilitate implementation, we collaborated with our education partners to develop a training for all the staff involved with the education CFT. This included County Office of Education, ILP, Pivotal, and the CFT facilitators. We also provided training for other staff and partners such as housing case managers, CASA, RAP teams, and legal advocates for children and youth, who are the attorneys who represent our foster youth. The training was not mandatory for all social workers. In Santa Clara County, staff development conducts mandatory trainings, and it's quite difficult to get on their calendar. So we sent out an all-staff memo to social workers, supervisors, and managers, informing them about the education CFTs and encouraging them to utilize this resource. In the past academic year 2020-2021, our county piloted education CFTs with youth that were previously served by Pivotal in the case management model. We also looked at 8th to 9th graders and outreach social workers. More recently, the CFT unit presented at our DFCS all staff meeting. Next slide, please. Starting this academic year, 2021 to 2022, our county has held 17 education CFTs for 14 individual youth between the ages of 14 and 20. Currently, a survey is being created to collect our youth's feedback. The facilitators and providers who participated in these education CFTs shared a few things that they thought would be well to consider as the education CFTs go forward. One of the areas is communicating about issues and concerns, excuse me, before the education CFT. So questions about the youth's academic standing, how many credits they need to graduate, their IEP status, or when's the next testing dates. These types of topics can take away from the focus of the youth's goals if it's done during the education CFT. So it's highly recommended that these concerns and issues be brought up at a separate meeting before the education CFT. Another area that talked about was that they felt the CFTs worked best when all participants arrived at time and stayed for the whole meeting. In their experience, they've had providers come late, leave early, which really they felt disrupted the process. So it's highly recommended that whoever is going to be participating attend for the full duration of the meeting. And lastly, they also mentioned being prepared with educational resources. Both providers and facilitators really appreciated learning about what's available to the youth out in the community. Sometimes we in the field may feel that the information is obvious or everyone knows it, but that's not always the case. So even if you have education resources information that you think everyone already knows, bring it anyways and present it, because there's a good chance that not everyone is aware of it. So now I will turn it over to Jessica and Deborah to present on training.
Thank you so much. One of the other best practices that we wanted to share with everybody today is a strategy around how to provide training to social workers, probation officers, and caregivers. So I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Deborah, to share about the strategy around training social workers and probation officers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. All right. So I wanted to just do a little bit of context setting first. So beginning in April of 2018, JBay partnered with Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services to develop and test a series of interventions across DCFS, specifically in the Antelope Valley region, which is comprised of 2 local offices, the Lancaster and Palmdale regional offices. The goal was really to evaluate and bolster how social workers and supervisors could be better equipped to support their youth in their pursuit toward post-secondary education and increase college enrollment. So we really looked at first reflecting on our own experiences and how we knew at very young ages we were going to go to college and what that inspiration really looked like and who did the expectation setting, and recognizing that a lot of our foster youth don't have those cornerstone moments. I jokingly share to this day, currently my 6-year-old can't wait to go to college because, you know, we've joked that he wants to eat pizza for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we said there's a time and a place for that, and that's in college, right? And so we've already kind of planted the seeds of this college going mindset with like a cute little family joke that he can have pizza for breakfast, lunch, and dinner when he's in college. But you see how these early conversations really just plant the seeds for the expectation and the possibility and the hope of post-secondary education. But when our foster youth are in multiple placements and there are misconceptions about their ability to graduate or be, quote, college-going material, and some of these other myths, or the myth that there is no funding for them to be able to go to college, et cetera, and so forth, there just becomes an air where CSWs, our social workers, don't necessarily know what avenues to post-secondary education look like specifically for foster youth. And we really wanted to deepen our conversation and our training around what that looks like and the really pivotal points throughout a youth's education that help improve the likelihood of post-secondary education and college going. So we really looked at a couple of main core areas. One was developing a training on post-secondary education, really setting the stage for the value, much like Jessica did earlier when she laid out the points around earning potential and better outcomes globally in, healthcare and things like that when you receive education. So that was some of the foundational work. Another piece was developing ongoing coaching. So we had 9 follow-up case consultations where we would present specific cases where perhaps the CSW was stuck or didn't really know what options might be available to their youth. And we brought it to a round table where we were able to brainstorm and provide feedback and coaching around making sure that we had an identified support person, making sure that, that they were receiving all the credits that they needed. If they had multiple placement disruptions, that we looked at any credit gaps and deficiencies that existed, and then worked to remedy those. So we really wanted to change the culture and the understanding to make it so that CSWs and supervisors really bought into that every child in care has the ability to achieve post-secondary education and have a concrete understanding of kind of what needed to take place in order to better support that. And so from that, we also were able to develop a specific educational planning checklist that focused on grades 8 through 12 around various activities that we know help improve those outcomes. So ensuring that they've met with counselors, that they've participated in various testing, the FAFSA completion, college campus tours, things of that nature, And we really worked very closely to weave in these touch points to organic casework. So ensuring that we leveraged the TILP and the Child and Family Team Meeting, as well as supervision, in order to ensure that these conversations were happening and that youth were supported around education. Next slide. Okay, so the training really included a lot of the following learning objectives. So it was recognizing the role that trauma plays on educational outcomes, deconstructing those common misconceptions that perpetuate implicit bias, as I said earlier, describing the different post-secondary education pathways, including technical education 2- and 4-year programs, depending on the youth's interest and credits at the time, and really what was realistic for that youth, and supporting them in their desires. Demonstrating how to engage and motivate young people around college and career exploration, and then again, identifying those key education planning milestones in middle school and high school, making sure that not only were we checking boxes that they were completed or had the opportunity to be exposed, but that they were actually doing them, and that people, the youth's natural supports and formal supports, had active roles in ensuring that those milestones were achieved. Next slide. Thank you. So by the end of the training, we were really hoping that social workers would be able to demonstrate a broader understanding of the financial aid process and key considerations for foster youth. So there was a lot of deep dive into the various grants and scholarships available to youth. There was a deep dive into FAFSA completion and what that looked like. We even included and planned for FAFSA workshops to help support this as part of the program. We identified educational resources and supports across K-12 and higher education locally to create sort of a flow chart and connection point at each one of our school sites. As you can imagine, LA County being the largest county in the state, Los Angeles, LAUSD alone has like 85, Los Angeles has over 85 districts within the county borders. And so our community has more than a dozen, I would guesstimate off the top of my head. And so given that, there are various supports both at the district level and at each school level, as well as embedded within our system. And we needed to kind of create a flow chart so that CSWs could more easily navigate if they had specific questions or needed to do additional teaming, outreach, and connection. And so we were able to create that. And then we also really wanted them to come away with the ability to utilize that teaming to successfully implement SB 12 and create cross-systems college-going culture. So it really was, you know, educating them and also shifting the idea or the belief system that it wasn't for every foster youth, and ensuring that CSWs, supervisors, and even our partners in education really believed in the possibility and were champions of hope for our foster youth. We also hoped to integrate college and career planning into some of the foundational work that social workers are doing with their youth, such as, again, utilizing that CFTM process, TLP, and being very detailed in their court report writing to lay out how youth were doing, any gaps that we could identify, and what was being done to address that. So we had like who, what's, and when's very clearly laid out. Next slide. All right, so the training was also adapted by JBAE for statewide use for social workers and probation officers, with additional input from Ventura County Office of Education and Santa Clara Department of Social Services. The training really is intended to be used to train both case-carrying social workers and probation officers, as well as their supervisors, to ensure that they have the skills to integrate this into their day-to-day supervision. The training duration is 4.5 hours or so, virtual or in person. When we did ours, it was pre-COVID, so we had the fortune of doing it in person. The training can be provided as a one-day or divided into 2 parts to make it more attainable. Materials included PowerPoint slides, detailed presenters notes, accompanying handouts and materials, and the trainer's guide will be ready for dissemination mid-April. A link to these materials will be found within the materials for today's training. And trainers should consider a co-presenter model that leverages subject matter experts across sectors. So in our case, at the time prior to being in the ARA, I was a supervisor in this pilot, and my specialty was as a coach developer around core practice model and child and family team meeting training and implementation. And so my SME expertise came in around that and how to organically embed conversations around education in that CFTM process. And then my counterpart, co-presenter and trainer, it was over AB12 and transition age youth, and really honed into her expertise to present on the leveraging the TILP and how to embed educational goals and milestones within that planning portion that already exists in the casework, and sort of simplifies for CSWs topics that should naturally be included in these case planning touch points. So in considering co-presenter, you also, your County Office of Education Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program, or FYSCP, or Community College Foster Youth Program, could be a great partnership opportunity to have them speak to some of those college planning touch points that really leverages their expertise. All right, next slide, and I'll hand it over to Jessica. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And, after the efforts that happened with the College Bound Antelope Valley pilot, I did want to share for those of you considering providing some of these trainings or interventions that we at JBay did hire an external evaluator to look at the interventions that were implemented. And here are some highlights of just some of the positive feedback we heard from the training, that a lot of folks felt that it was really helpful in gaining new knowledge and practical strategies. They also reported the social workers and supervisors felt like it was very beneficial to attend these trainings together as a unit. They also recommended that it's great, ideally, to deliver this content on a single day with relief from case management responsibilities, so they can really focus on this training, and also schedule caseload coverage to be able to support the units actually attending together for that learning process. And as Deborah mentioned, just to note, when this was done, it was initially before COVID, so the trainings were done in person. So now I think folks can adapt it to do this in person or virtually. But there was also really positive feedback about the educational checklist as being a helpful resource for social workers to help guide them in making sure that their youth were on track for post-secondary education. And that they also recommended that in addition to the training, it would be helpful to incorporate the content of the training into ongoing monthly unit meetings, so that it just becomes part of best practice to have this as a conversation piece to increase consistent integration into, as Deborah was mentioning, all their routine social work practices, from case planning to doing the TILP or the CFTs and things of that nature. And the effort with College Bound Antelope Valley in LA has actually just been one of many strategies that LA County is actually engaged in right now, focusing on increasing post-secondary attainment for foster youth. It's actually part of a larger initiative that JBay convenes called the Foster Youth College Advancement Project within the LA Opportunity Youth Collaborative. And I'm also really excited to share that in addition to the social worker training that we're sharing with you all today, we also have a similar version of this training specifically for caregivers in California. And the reason we also wanted to focus on caregivers is that, we felt that it was really important that all people on the youth team have this information. So it's not just the social worker, it's the social worker, the caregivers, all the adult supporters in the youth life, having this information so that for the youth, right, the more they hear that college is possible, that they are capable, the more likely that they're gonna buy into that reality, and then really have the necessary supports and resources to achieve that goal. And I think another benefit with this training is it can really equip caregivers with the necessary information to support youth into post-secondary education pathways. And for many of them, it can equip them with the information so that they can even be that post-secondary education support person as part of SB 12 after completing this training as well. And so here's just a quick overview about what the training entails for caregivers. It's a little bit different in structure where there's two parts to the training. Education course 1 is focused more on caregivers with younger youth in 6th through 10th grade, and it's about 3 hours long. And education course 2 is focused more with caregivers in 11th and 12th grade and also about 3 hours long. And we have the links to the training materials listed here on the website. And I just wanted to note as well that when we're talking about caregivers for this training, it's really designed for any caregiver, whether we're talking about relative caregivers, non-relative, staff at STRTPs or staff at FFAs, which stands for foster family agencies. So it can be applicable to many different types of caregiver settings. And when you go to those links, we have robust materials so anyone could pick up this training and provide it to the caregivers in their region. There's a comprehensive trainer's guide, PowerPoints in English and Spanish that have detailed presenter's notes. It's pretty much all scripted for someone who wants to provide the training. There's also a pre-recorded Train the Trainer webinar for anyone who wants to watch that, and a whole host of different supplemental resources that can be provided to caregivers as well. And for any of you thinking about providing this training in your county, I do want to share, LA County has actually made this training a requirement for all their caregivers in LA County across, as I mentioned, STRTP staff, FFA staff, and resource families. And one of the ways that they're doing this is we've worked together to build the capacity of several different entities to be able to provide this training. So in LA County, it's being provided by our foster and kinship care educators, also known as FKCE. It's being provided by our local County of Office of Education within their Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. And also the pre-recorded Train the Trainer webinar was actually provided to LA's FFA and STRTP providers. So, this could also be shared with any providers in your community who are looking on getting trained in the content. So I think if you're interested in doing the training, you could also look at other partners in your region that could have the capacity to provide this training to your caregivers as well. And in addition to that, another option for caregivers interested in getting this content is Foster Parent College. And if you're not familiar, Foster Parent College is an online, actually nationwide training platform for caregivers that's available 24/7, very interactive. And Education Course 1 that we talked about for those younger youth in 6th through 10th grade has actually been converted for Foster Parent College in English. It's called Preparing Teens for Post-Secondary Education. And through a partnership with our California Department of Social Services, CDSS, it's actually free for any California caregivers to take advantage of. And we're already seeing through our initial evaluation, this training just launched in May, that caregivers nationwide are reporting that they're finding it as very helpful to adding to their knowledge and their support of young people. And we actually will be converting Education Course 2 to Foster Parent College as well, which we're anticipating will launch this fall. So we'll keep you all posted about that too. But I think there's many avenues for folks interested in getting this information out to caregivers to also equip them and prepare them to support youth with post-secondary education planning. So I'll now turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Jessica. So I'm going to walk us through our final best practice that we're going to be talking about today, which is increasing cross-system collaboration. Next slide, please. So the SB 12 work group participants frequently cited cross-system collaboration as key to successful implementation of SB 12. Interestingly, though, collaboration really varied from learning community county to learning community county, where some really relied heavily on formalized and contract-based agreements, which we'll also be talking about, but also ad hoc and event-focused work groups. And so as an example, I have an event from Monterey County that I wanted to highlight. They formed an SB 12 work group that worked together to plan an event that was held on July 24th of last year. It was called the Fast Track to Success event, and it was a one-day event that provided foster youth in middle school and high school with encouragement and support to embark on post-secondary education. And it was really culmination of months-long planning between the Monterey County Department of Social Services, Monterey County Office of Education, CASA of Monterey County, and Hartnell College. And the Fast Track to Success event walked foster youth through resource booths that covered topics including career exploration, volunteer and internship opportunities, college pathways, financial aid and scholarships, housing, all of it. And the youth who attended received backpacks and other sort of swag, as well as $50 gift cards. And there were also other opportunities for them to win prizes. The other thing that Monterey County did to really incentivize participation in this event was that they provided caregivers with 2 hours towards their annual resource family approval training requirements. So if they attended and they brought their youth, or if they just attended on their own, and engaged with some of the vendors and the booths, they were able to get some training credit, which was a really great opportunity for them. And like I said, this is just really an example of sort of an ad hoc event focused cross-system collaboration where partners are coming together to really kind of create some excitement for our foster youth around attending post-secondary education, and also making sure that they know about their resources. But I'm going to now turn it over to Carla to talk a little bit about some of the more formalized cross-system collaboration efforts from Santa Clara County.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. So yes, here in Santa Clara County, we definitely had a more formalized process. As mentioned earlier, with our County Office of Education, we have our Education Manager program that's all based off of the ACL 16-91. It outlines COEs and the county's partnerships in providing educational case management services. And there's certain language in that ACL referring foster youth to services that meet local needs identified through collaborative relationships and local advisory groups, which may include but shall not be limited to all of the following, which is mentoring, counseling, transitioning services, and emancipation services. So just that language alone really bleeds into the education CFT, is that can be considered as a transitioning or emancipation service. So it would be important to highlight that in if you have a current contract with your County Office of Education. And then as noted earlier, we were able to leverage an existing contract that we had with Pivotal. We were able to really change the scope of service to be in alignment with the publication that we created with JBay. And thanks to Sarah for doing all the typing with that publication that was created for our county. So in that, we were really able to identify what activities Pivotal interns were to do with these youth that they were assigned to during an education CFT. So we identified using the career zone, aptitude tests, really having, Pivotal's role really is to help this young person envision that, college, post-secondary or technical education is achievable. Really walk them through what are their career interests, identify what kind of education path. Is it a 2-year, 4-year? Do they want to get a certificate? And then also learning, how are they going to finance it? I think a lot of our foster youth really get a little overwhelmed and tend to want to work thinking that, in order to survive, especially here in our county and our neighboring counties, a lot of our young people decide, oh, well, I'm going to work for a few years and then maybe I'll go back to college. But really helping them to identify that you can afford college, and don't put it off. Let's, start little by little. And then also, the role of the Pivotal intern is, our coach, as we say, is to really help the youth build the necessary skills and tools, self-advocacy, organization, communication, time management, to just be both successful individuals as well as students, and knowing what resources are on campus. And then with our ILP program, within that contract, the ILP case managers are designated to attend all the 90-day transition meetings and then our My Time meetings, and they don't necessarily have to attend a education CFT if there's not an ILP case manager assigned to that young person. But, we really want the social worker to, make the referral to our ILP program. And, the ILP case manager could be like a secondary support person to help this young person to achieve their education goals. So again, in our county, we really used our contracts to really identify the roles and responsibilities for all the parties who attend this education CFT. So now I'll turn it back to Sarah.
Sorry, this is Jessica. I was just trying to find my unmute button there. So I wanted to share with you, based on the learnings from the learning community, we put together at JV a series of different administrative and also policy recommendations that we think could be really helpful in advancing implementation of SB 12 and ultimately ensuring that our youth are connected to the necessary support so we can see increases in matriculation into post-secondary education. And so on this slide, we have just a few of our administrative recommendations. I'll go through a little bit quickly for the sake of time. But our first recommendation, as was mentioned earlier, is one of the challenges with implementation right now is that within the way that SB 12 is currently being required to be entered within CWS CMS, counties can't report or gather data to ensure SB 12 compliance. And so one of our recommendations is that the state creates a special projects code that counties can use to be able to track SB 12 compliance and run reports within their counties. And we see that as a short-term strategy. We know that the state is also working simultaneously to convert the current CWS CMS system to CWS CARES, but we know that that won't be launching for quite a few years, potentially fall 2025. But we do recommend that as that system is getting built, that being aware of that challenge that we're currently seeing with the current system, that the new system is designed in a way that does allow for a unique field to be able to track and report on SB 12 compliance. Our other recommendation is around the local court reports. So as I had mentioned earlier with Assembly Bill 153, Judicial Council has until January 1st, 2023 to update their rules of courts and forms. But we also know that while they create standardized forms, counties still have the discretion to develop or modify their own court forms for local use. So we recommend that both Judicial Council as well as counties make sure that they develop and modify their own court report forms to be able to track and measure SB 12 compliance. In addition to that, we do recommend that counties also adapt their own court report forms that the social workers have to fill out, so that it can be embedded in there easily for social workers with prompts and instructions about how they can actually communicate to the court that they've successfully completed SB 12, that a post-secondary education support person has been identified. And ideally, it would be great if it would also indicate who that person is and their role in relationship to the youth. And our last recommendation is around the Transition Independent Living Plan, or the TILP. When we were working in LA County, there was actually a work group that was formed across many different partners, including our LA County Office of Child Protection, Probation Department, and Department of Children and Family Services, as well as County Office of Education. And what they had recommended is that they felt that the TILP would actually be a very important tool to be able to meet the legal mandate of SB 12. And so what they recommended is that there'd be some adaptations to the current TILP form to be able to track SB 12 completion. And these recommendations were actually submitted to the state for consideration, and CDSS has communicated to us that they do plan to adapt and adopt those recommendations and send out the new TILP form with an accompanying ACIN. But I wanted to share with you all what those recommendations were to adapt the TILP. And I know it's probably hard to see on the screen, but this is a screenshot of the current TILP. And we highlighted in yellow what areas the work group felt like should be adapted. And essentially, it recommends that the youth are informed about their legal rights around SB 12, that they're aware that someone is required to be identified to assist them with their college applications, and that the form actually has a special field to indicate both who the youth's educational rights holder is, but also who their post-secondary education support person is, what their contact information is, if they'll be assisting them with their college applications or financial applications or both, and that there's also a field added for their supervisor to be able to review the form and sign it and ensure that it's done completely and accurately. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about some of the policy recommendations as well.
Great, thank you so much, Jessica. So similarly, we developed some legislative or statutory recommendations. The first that you're probably not surprised to hear at this point is that we recommend mandating education-focused child and family team meetings for all foster youth in grades 8th and above. And we talked, to an extent today about how important education CFTs are to making sure that foster youth are on track for college matriculation. But we also recognize too that there are so many competing priorities when it comes to setting an agenda for a CFT, and they tend to really focus on those crisis or emergency needs. And so we really are hopeful that the legislature will enact legislation that requires education CFTs for post-secondary planning beginning in 8th grade, or no later than 8th grade ideally, and occurring at least annually to track progress. Of course, foster youth who are closer to matriculation, those who are in grades 11 or 12, might require more frequent meetings to ensure that they're completing very time-sensitive deadlines and tasks. The next requirement is ensuring that social workers and probation officers complete training on post-secondary planning and matriculation. We know that they are so central to developing the youth's case plan and helping determine services and supports for youth. And so we want to ensure that they really receive formalized training that can help them guide youth during this planning process and ultimately achieve their post-secondary goals. The other thing to note about this recommendation is that we want to make sure that the training be required for all social workers and probation officers, and not just those who work with transition age youth, because post-secondary planning really should ideally begin no later than middle school. One of the things that we frequently hear from adult supporters of foster youth and foster youth themselves is that their college and career planning really doesn't start until they're in their last years of high school, and they feel like they're unprepared. They don't have all the resources that they need. In some instances, they don't even have the credits that they need. And so we want to make sure that these conversations happen earlier and routinely. The curricula that we discussed earlier, that Deborah and Jessica discussed, turning dreams into degrees, can be used to really meet these requirements. And so we encourage you to take a look at those resources that we've created for training social workers and probation officers. The next recommendation is very similar. We want to make sure that caregivers, including resource parents, foster family agency staff, and STRTP staff members, receive at least 3 hours of training to ensure that they also have the tools to assist youth with college exploration and planning. And again, we'd like to see this begin as early as sixth grade, but no later than 8th grade. And this, of course, we talked about this as well. We've already developed great training resources that can be used to meet this training requirement, and we want to see this become a requirement for caregivers. And then the last recommendation is focused on creating sustainable public funding sources to make sure that foster youth in California get all of the support that they need to pursue post-secondary pathways. We heard quite a bit from our co-presenters today how much we rely on our community partners to assist with this college planning and the applications for college and financial aid, because it really does require specialized knowledge and one-on-one high-touch support. And so we want to make sure that we are providing funding to the folks in the community who can provide that type of support. And again, be those designated support people who are helping our youth. All right, so we are very close to time, but if you have any remaining questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. If we don't have a chance to answer them on the webinar, we'll make sure to respond to you via email. As a reminder, all of the resources that we discussed today are on our website at the link on the screen. We will also have the slides from today's webinar as well as the recording of the webinar linked on this page as well, so check back for that. And then last but not least, I have my contact information on the last slide. I don't like my headshot anymore, so I'm just using childhood photos until I get some new pictures taken. So that's me at 3 years old. But if you have any questions for me or any of my wonderful co-presenters today, please feel free to send me an email, sarah@jbay.org, and I would be happy to connect with you. And with that being said, thank you all so much for taking 90 minutes out of your day today to learn about how we can team to better support our foster youth who would like to go to college. We really appreciate you and look forward to seeing you next time.